Hey everyone, it's Lexie. So in today's video, I'll be sharing with you some of my Halloween book reading recommendations. So I feel like Halloween is just like a fun time to read. I feel like especially kind of fall and winter is where I really get into a lot of kind of like themed reading. So in Halloween, kind of the fall time, I do like to read kind of atmospheric, spooky, fantastical books, and I feel like there are especially times where if I buy a book, I wait to read it around this time of year. So I always think this is a fun, especially time to kind of dive into really specific books. So I have 5 books here that kind of have a spooky vibe, whether there are kind of anything that's like scary, not too scary, but like, you know, has some like thrilling elements, fantastical elements, all these things. So these are books that I think kind of fit that Halloween vibe if you're kind of looking for it. So, and they're kind of all over in terms of genre too. So without further ado, let's get started. First up, I have The Diviners by Libba Bray. The first book in particular, I found like kind of scary, even though it's like not super scary, but the way and like the writing style of how it was written was kind of like spooky. And I was reading it at like nighttime, and I was like, my bedroom's on the main floor, like if someone could be looking in, like it kind of made me kind of scared, which is a good testament for a book. But this is a fantasy series. There's 4 books total, and it takes place in the 1920s, and it follows kind of this ragtag group of friends who, and some of them have kind of powers that are known, that they call themselves like diviners, or they're people that have some sort of like kind of magic to them. So one person can touch an object and know the history of the person who owned it. One person can like heal people or walk through dreams. So these type of things. And in amongst kind of the 1920s New York setting, there are a series of murders taking place that have a weird kind of paranormal aspect to it, and the gang somehow finds themselves inadvertently involved in the investigation. It goes from there. I will say that the scope of this series goes well beyond kind of the fantastical elements. It also incorporates a lot of kind of human rights, and it doesn't shy away from a lot of the kind of issues that were very much prevalent within this era, specifically the treatment of non-white people, the eugenics movement, kind of politics, and it draws a lot of parallels to kind of what was going on at this, you know, point in time with kind of 2016 era. So it's very interesting how the author draws a lot of parallels in amongst all of this like fantastical storylines. So this is a fun series. Like I said, the first one's kind of spooky, so just be aware. It's not like scary, but it's just kind of like a fun spooky, so nothing like too intense, but it's definitely a lot of fun. And these characters, it's really fun to see them kind of grow and evolve over the course of the 4 books. So I cannot recommend this series enough. Next up, this is one that is a little bit more scary, and I don't know if it was just me who found it scary or whatever, but it is The Winter People by Jennifer McMahon. I read this book a long time ago, but it's definitely one that has stuck out to me in terms of it being a little bit scary. So it follows this girl who lives in this very old house in Vermont, and her mother has gone missing. And while this is happening, she discovers this journal of a woman who used to live in this house in the 1800s, who was accused of basically kind of killing her daughter and kind of going crazy. So while the main character is trying to figure out what happened to her mom, you're getting kind of these like diary entries, and it just is very spooky. Again, it kind of has like a paranormal feel to it, but I just found it super spooky, and just some of the descriptions of like someone kind of looking in from the woods, and when it's like dark, and like creepy sense of being watched, I think was really well done. It's a really unique book. I don't think I've read really anything kind of like this, but I feel like this is the perfect time to kind of read it, even though it's called The Winter People, and it kind of takes place during the winter time in Vermont, which again, you can kind of read during that time as well if you want to kind of get the cold vibes. I feel like in terms of getting the spooky vibes, Halloween's a good time to read this book around, because it is, like I said, kind of a little spooky, but it was really fun and thrilling nonetheless. So if you're looking for something a little bit different, I think this might be a good book to check out. Next up, I have Mexican Gothic, and this is a book that I read around this time last year, and I really loved it. My fiance read it and he recommended it to me, and it's books that I've seen recommended several times on BookTube. But it follows this girl who, I want to say it's in the 1950s, living in Mexico, and she kind of gets these weird letters from her cousin, and she's suspecting that something's off because she married into this very kind of prestigious, wealthy family, and she's been very much isolated within their mansion that is very separate from their family. So she decides to go investigate, and while she's there at the house, there's these strange things going on. There's something off with the family. There's just something weird, and it kind of goes from there. I would definitely say this is like a slow burn, like horror type novel, and it was just really fun. Like, I definitely got the thrill that, and like the confusion and like the anxiety that the main character was feeling in terms of trying to figure out kind of what is going on. And it is definitely a little spooky. It was definitely really thrilling, especially the ending I found like super suspenseful. And I think this is definitely like a very Gothic, as the title says. It's like has a lot of Gothic vibes in terms of the mansion and all these other themes. So I think this is a really fun book to read, and also with it taking place in Mexico gives it a kind of different, unique setting from what I've typically read. So I really kind of enjoyed experiencing that culture and those cultural things that I kind of learned within this book, in addition to kind of the horror element as well. So it is definitely a fun and unique read. Next up, I have Gilded by Marissa Meyer, and this is one that kind of took me by surprise in terms of how dark it is. It is a fairy tale retelling of Rumpelstiltskin, and it's a duology, and I read this earlier in this year, which I think kind of is like a good time to read it, as well as kind of winter fall time. But there are definitely a lot, despite this being a fairy tale retelling, and from what I've known from Cinder, this is definitely a much more mature and darker retelling, which I think I really enjoyed. And again, it took me by surprise, but I really loved it. Especially, I think the second book is really good. But we follow this girl who has always kind of been known for kind of creating these elaborate lies, and so one night on a full moon she ends up crossing paths with this kind of haunted dead king, and she, in order to get out of it, makes up this elaborate story of how she can like kind of sew or like weave, what is the correct term? I'm going to put it here. Basically, she can turn straw into gold. And so he kind of holds her to that and takes her captive, and it kind of goes off from there. There are definitely a lot of like spooky fairy tale elements within here, and definitely some scary elements, and I really enjoyed it. Like I said, it took me by surprise because I'm used to her more like younger fairy tale retellings, like the Lunar Chronicles. So it was really a lot of fun, and definitely, like I said, I think like Halloween is a good time to read this, or kind of like peak winter, because you kind of get that cold vibe feeling where it's like dark and just cold, and you can just totally kind of immerse yourself within that reading environment. So this one, like I said, took me by surprise. I really ended up enjoying it. Next up, I have Piranesi, which is very like whimsical. It's also a very short book as well, but it has definitely been one of my favorite books that I've ever read. It is very interesting and it has really unique themes, but I think in terms of like the whimsicalness of the writing and the world, I think Halloween's a good time to read this. But basically we follow the main character known as Piranesi, and he is kind of, the story is told through his diary entries. So he lives in this kind of labyrinth style kind of environment called like a Piranesi, essentially, where there's these grand rooms. Some have like oceans in them, but it's just kind of ever going. And the only other person who lives there with him is the man that is known as the Other, and who kind of visits from time to time. But the main character is slowly starting to like piece together that something is like off, and it kind of goes off from there. I think this book does a really good job at kind of not really having a reliable narrator, in the sense that the main character doesn't really know what is going on, and there's really unique themes of kind of being in solitude, our relationship to the world around us, and like our impact on the world. I thought was really unique, and this is like a really unique book. I think it was beautifully written, and I think it is one that is best that you don't really know too much about this going into it. I will say the first 50-ish pages were a little bit slow, but it definitely starts to pick up and gets really suspenseful, where it turns like there's fantastical elements mixed in with like this murder mystery kind of feeling. And it is definitely a very unique read. It's also very short too, which makes it kind of easy to read as well. But if you're looking for something like whimsical and different, I think Piranesi would be a good book to read kind of around this time of year. So that's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below what are some of your go-to Halloween kind of reading recommendations and all of that fun stuff. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye, guys.